We should be banning things on an individualized basis and more towards the person rather than the tool. But I digress. You wouldn't ban a hammer because somebody chose to use that tool for a purpose that it was not intended for, correct?
It's like banning, black people from owning firearms or anything like that because they're the ones that commit the vast majority of crimes in urban areas.
Judging by the chart that I found here, white Americans actually get arrested more than black Americans do. And if you look at the chart, it does say that white Americans are arrested more for violent crimes than black Americans. So you may want to look into some research before you start spouting off nonsense.
We would never apply those blanket bans. This is a move that Democrats make, and certainly Republicans have done it as well, to be totally fair. But this is a play right out of the Democrat playbook.
Blanket bans should not be a thing. We should not be blanket banning anything. We should be banning things on an individualized basis and more towards the person rather than the tool. But I digress. You wouldn't ban a hammer because somebody chose to use that tool for a purpose that it was not intended for, correct? Same thing.
Not something that President Trump should be floating around. Now, the whole idea of being mentally defective, being put inside of a mental institution. Yes, there are some people that unfortunately, whatever, they're in such a state where, owning a firearm would be a really, really bad idea for some of these people. And there's already a law in the books. There's already a question on the 4473 when you do your background check that asks you this question. There are some people with such severe mental health issues, they should never have a gun. The problem is you kind of say, hey, we're not going to give you due process. We're going to try to legislate you from owning a firearm before you ever do or don't do anything with that firearm at all.
Yes, there are cases where individuals should not be allowed to own firearms due to their mental health or whatever. They have been deemed to be a danger to themselves and others by a doctor and a judge and everybody in that process. But see, what Trump is trying to do is he is trying to legislatively blanket ban one group of individuals due to the actions of individuals of that community and take due process completely out of the picture, even though most of the community is not violent and have no intentions of being violent. And statistics prove that less than 1% of all mass shootings are done by a trans person.
We're going to assume you're guilty before you ever do anything just because of who you are and the rate at which they are committing these types of acts now, which is higher, and none of us want to see these things happen.
Again, statistically, you are incorrect. While trans people make up less than 1% of all mass shootings, 51% goes to white males. Just saying.
Problem is, like I've said before, I'll keep saying it, you can't legislate evil out of people's hearts. Because what do people do when you tell them, hey, you can't buy a gun or whatever like that? Well, the vast majority of them, like we already know, will buy those guns through illegal means, bypass the system altogether. So who do you hurt? Law-abiding gun owners.
Exactly. Criminals are still going to get a hold of guns because somebody who is buying a gun for an ill intention does not buy that gun the legal way. They do not go about it the legal way. Criminals are still going to have guns no matter what the law is because they do not care about the law, hence why they're criminals. The only one that gun legislature hurts is those who are legally trying to acquire guns who are law-abiding citizens. It does not hurt the criminals. It really doesn't. All you're hurting is the people that you would want to have a gun in a situation, not a criminal, because criminals are still going to have them. They have had them forever. There's laws against criminals having them, but they still have them.
We have to hold the same standard for all gun owners. And it really doesn't even stop there, right? The left has proposed ideas, well, if you're on the no-fly list, even if you're there unjustifiably, you should have your gun rights stripped. if you're on Social Security benefits. This has been something that's floated around in the past. So if grandma gets a little bit of help, well, she loses her Glock. There's even been proposals for people that are on certain types of meds like ADHD, anxiety meds, things like that. You're talking about banning millions of people based on certain conditions that they have that are probably, most likely well controlled under medication, and yet all of a sudden they lose their rights because they have something, going on. Something ain't clicking just right. That doesn't necessarily mean they're like a danger to society. But here's why I understand what President Trump is doing. I just think he's going about it the completely wrong way. He's looking at it from the mental health aspect. And this is certainly something we have to address. Look, there's, 400 million guns plus in the United States. Maybe 100 million gun owners. Maybe not quite that much. There's tens and tens of millions of us. And 0.1% are ever used in a crime. Okay? So guns clearly aren't the problem.
No one should be just blanket banned from owning a firearm. They should be deemed unfit to carry a firearm on an individualized basis through the use of due process. That is what it is there for. No, guns are not the problem. Guns are but a tool, just like any other. Used for an unintended purpose, they can cause massive destruction, but they are still a tool like any other. If Trump was looking at it from a mental health standpoint, he would actually look at the statistics and see where the most violence is coming from, which is most definitely not the trans community. Just saying.
Chicago, Baltimore, other cities around the United States, right? They have some of the strictest gun laws and yet some of the highest crime rates. So there's no correlation there between stricter gun control and lower crime. Matter of fact, overall crime has gone down as gun ownership has gone up. But mental health is definitely something we have to focus on. And the trans community is a huge part of that. I didn't realize this, but 5% of young adults, this may even include youth too, or that might be a different statistic, but 5% of young adults at least identify as trans.
I don't know where you're getting your information from, but as best as I could find, 0.5 to 0.95% of the population of adults is transgender. Just saying. So whatever your source is saying is incorrect, and you might want to do a little bit more fact checking, because I found this and I did not find anything that anything like what you were looking at there. So please enlighten me as to your source for your research.
That's up from like 0.05 just like a decade ago, right? So that has gone drastically up. But what do we know about that community? The rates of them taking their own lives is much higher. But then you start to kind of feed into that, where studies have shown that a vast majority of young people and kids that identify a certain way will actually grow out of it. The problem is we now try to confirm that, or some people try to confirm that as quickly as possible. So what do? You give them that verbal affirmation, and then worse, you start giving them medications to affirm that belief, a belief that they may certainly grow out of, and statistics will show that. And then what you do is you end up wrecking their bodies almost forever. Bone density, permanent infertility, higher risk of cardiovascular issues. The list goes on and on. Not to mention the struggle, right, that some of these people face knowing that they've done irreversible damage to their bodies. Or worse, the ultimate affirmation, which is surgery. And then these people kind of realize, like, what did I do, right?
Yes, you have to admit that suicide rates among transgender people are quite high, but then you have to take into consideration, why are they quite high? Is it because the trans person can't handle the fact that they're trans, or is it because they're scared that society will reject them and beat them and kill them because they are trans? Out of fear, they hide it, hide who they are, and try to not be who they are, not be true to themselves, creating a turmoil in themselves and a war, so to speak, and that they don't recover from, creating a lot of mental illness and possibly suicidal tendencies or thoughts. Then you have to also take into consideration one more thing, that the most proven successful method for treating a transgender person is gender affirming care. And for anybody to sit there and say that it is not is asinine and uneducated. Okay, so then I'm going to turn around and ask you a question. What is the harm in allowing a child to figure out who they are through their gender expression, gender identity, whatnot? Whatever it is, what is the harm in letting a child explore that? So, no child is receiving hormones and stuff that is going to make them infertile just because they say they're trans. That is not happening, so you might as well forget that. But what is happening when a child says they are trans and their parents take them to get care from their local physician or whatnot, then that local physician will confer with a psychologist or refer to the patient to a psychologist who will then confer with the patient and see what is best to proceed in the medical treatment, whether that be puberty blockers, which literally only block puberty and are heavily monitored by a physician to for any side effects that before they become irreversible, and then they then choose the right course of action for medical treatment for that child through psychological analysis and the doctor's referrals. So the information that you are spreading is completely and utterly wrong, and you should again do some research before you spout it.
Surgery doesn't lower the chances of them actually taking their lives, it only increases from there. The point is, not all of them will grow out of it, but when you have, a 1,300 or 1,500 or even 2,000% increase in that short amount of time with very temporary, if any, relief, once you start affirming this type of behavior instead of trying to get to the root cause of what's actually happening, it doesn't make any sense. That's why you see a lot of other countries, they're backing off of like the blockers and medications and things like that because the long-term effects can be absolutely destructive to people. Now, nobody really wants to talk about that, but that's the truth of it. So yes, there's a mental health.
So, not all transgender people get SRS or any surgeries for that matter. They're happy with who they are. Some people do, but that's all depending on the person. And again, children are not getting these surgeries, period. Just saying. As for you saying gender affirming care provides little to no relief to transgender people, you again need to go back and do some research because again, gender affirming care is the most successful way to treat a transgender person. And no, other countries are not backing off their gender affirming care for transgender people. They're actually pushing it more and helping more with it because it is again the most successful way to treat a transgender person. Again, do your research, but just a little bit. As for saying there's a mental health crisis in this community, I don't think it's strictly stuck to one community. Because if you look at the statistics, they say tell a different story, tell a different tale. It says that mental illness is throughout society and throughout the community. There is no one group that has it more than others.
Stop right there. What were you going to do? Just watch the video and leave? Without even leaving a trace of your existence? Don't you know that liking, sharing, and subscribing is a great way to show the creator that you enjoyed their content? Plus, you won't miss out on future uploads from this creator? What's wrong with you? Have you no decency?